This lecture will be focusing on talking about guided reading groups, what they are, and the purpose behind them, and how they should be structured. This lecture is presented by myself, Dr. Beam. When we think about teaching the youngest learners how to read, we want to make sure that as the educators that we're remembering that we are not just teaching them how to read, but we're also teaching them how to think. So teaching a kid how to read is both a thinking and a learning process. And it's just a good reminder for us because we can focus on if we teach kids letter names, letter sounds, how they go together, the way words work, that we can get kids reading pretty easily. But we also want to make sure that we're always thinking about also having kids think about what it means to be a reader, the kinds of things that readers do, and the way readers think when they are reading in order to create the most effective lifelong readers. If we do those things early on in the elementary program, we are really setting kids up for success later in elementary and middle school and high school when that thinking component will be required for their work. So when we think about guided reading groups, we actually should always be thinking that each interaction should include 5 stages. 5 stages are pre-reading, reading, responding, exploring, and applying. And I know that that can feel really overwhelming because typically when we have reading groups, they're only for a short amount of time. And so 5 steps feels like a lot. And we also have a classroom management issue because all the other kids are out working independently at their seats. But what I'm challenging you is to think that guided reading groups are not just structured in a way that it's get them back there and get them to read this book as fast as they can. Instead, we really want to be thinking about what are the pre-reading strategies we're teaching, as well as the reading and the responding, and then extending that into the exploring and applying phases as well. So we're going to talk about those things through this guided reading series. Let's start with pre-reading. When we call that group of 5 or 6 or 7 kids back to our reading table and they're sitting around us, the first thing that we want to do after maybe we do a little word work or a little sight word practice, it's time to get out the little reader, the little book that we're going to use. So we want to think first of all about some pre-reading strategies. Maybe we want to talk about the purpose of this book that we're going to read. Is it to persuade you, to inform you, to entertain you, or to maybe just make you think about something? We want to make sure that we're talking about that with each little leveled reader that we show to kids. Another pre-reading strategy we consider is connecting to our schema or our background knowledge. So if you're getting ready to share in a little reader that is about a fishing trip with dad, maybe you let the kids talk about their experiences going fishing with their dad, with their grandfather, with a friend. Maybe they haven't gone fishing, but what have they read about fishing or watched about fishing? So connecting to our schema to kind of set our mind thinking about the topic that we're getting ready to read about is a pre-reading strategy. Perhaps you've set it up so that across the month, your little leveled readers are all going to be focusing on the same unit or the same topic. Maybe all of the books for this month are going to be about life cycles. And so with each new book that you introduce, you're going to connect that to the broader unit or study focus so that kids can easily make that connection from week to week and book to book. Sometimes we can teach the pre-reading strategy of just making predictions. What do we think is going to happen in this story? This skill can be done by showing kids the front cover of the book, letting them see what the title is, maybe a picture of some of the characters, and then asking them to go ahead and predict what they think is going to happen in the story or what the story is going to be about. And then a very common one is doing a picture walk or a text walk before they read. With a picture walk, we just flip through every single page in the little reader looking at the pictures so that we can see what's going to happen in the story. A text walk, sometimes we cover up the picture with our hands and instead we just look briefly at the text as we flip through the whole story. But we don't let the pictures and the text interact with each other until we actually start reading the book. But by doing a picture or a text walk, we start to get our brain thinking about the concepts that are going to be in the book that we're getting ready to read. Then, of course, it's the actual reading time. When we're reading in our small groups, we want to make sure that we're interacting with kids about what they're reading. Are they making predictions along the way or inferencing what's going to happen? Are they applying those skills and strategies that we've been teaching about what to do when they encounter words? And if they're not, we want to be encouraging that and modeling it. Sometimes we read through it without stopping so that we can practice our fluency. And that might happen when we're at a point where we're reviewing a book before we move on to another one. But sometimes we need to stop along the way and really focus on the skills and strategies that we're covering. Remember that in a guided reading group, when the kids are sitting with you around the table, kids can read independently. Typically, it's out loud, but it is possible for guided reading groups to happen to be read silently. Let kids read with a partner, the person sitting beside them. Let it be a shared reading experience where people take turns. Or sometimes it is a literal guided reading process where you as the teacher are guiding them, modeling for them, and showing them how to read through this text. Don't forget, teach kids how to read the illustrations, the charts, the diagrams, the maps, anything that's included in the text. It's not just about the story, but it's also about the skill of teaching them how to think about what is all included in this story that actually makes it an entertaining, engaging, and informative story and reading experience. We have to teach our earliest readers how to read these things. And then remember, especially as our kids get into higher levels and the little readers become longer and they have more text, a guided reading group doesn't have to be just reading the entire text selection. It might just be reading a couple of pages or focusing in on a text because of what the specific information is about or what skills have to be used in that particular page. Just don't limit yourself or let yourself fall into the same habits and patterns of always thinking that the reading has to look the same in every guided reading experience. Challenge yourself and challenge the kids as well with different types of reading and different ways of reading text. Now, I think sometimes the responding part we don't really think about because there's not a lot of time for it. But there's definitely a place for it. Maybe we're going to actually have a reader's response notebook that kids write in, and you talk about the text, and then they're going to leave you and go back to their seat and write their response in their journal. Maybe you give them a prompt, or maybe it's an open reflection day where they write about what they've read. Sometimes we just reflect by participating in instructional conversation around the table. Maybe I just let the kids interact with each other about the text. Maybe I ask them very specific questions, but we engage in conversation about what we read. It's so important to make sure that you just think about how kids are going to respond to the text so that it's not just finish my book, done, now I go back to my seat. Instead, what happens after they close the book, no matter how brief or short that time is? Exploring. When we explore, we want kids to reread and think more deeply about the text. This is a time where it doesn't maybe happen in the small group, but this can be the seat work that occurs. Let kids make connections, add to their background, add to their schema. Give them skills and seat work and strategies that actually relate to what you're working on in your guided reading group. Maybe you're trying to examine a particular author's craft. Maybe you want to focus in on learning new vocabulary related to the text that you've been reading. Maybe you want them to participate in mini lessons or strategy lessons, things that have to do with determining importance in text. or visualizing the story as we read it. Just make sure that you are thinking about ways to connect your seat work experience with what's actually happening in the guided reading group. It doesn't always have to be disconnected. Applying. Now, we're not going to do this with every single little book that we read, of course, but I challenge you to think about when are the times that my guided reading groups can actually apply their skills a little bit farther. Maybe I let them construct projects or work in groups to create something or to solve a problem. Maybe I connect them with other books related to the topic and encourage them to do an experience outside of what's happening in our small group. All of this can always be part of a bigger thematic unit that we are studying about. Too often, I see guided reading just being a set of books and leveled readers that I have to get my students through. Instead, it will take some extra planning, but think about how can what is happening in my groups relate to what is happening in independent reading, and then relate to what's happening in our large group reading and writing instruction. When it all connects and comes together, that's when kids really learn how to value the reading experience as a whole. And that's when they become thinkers and readers.